Today I have an amazing project that uses a layer cake. All we are going to be doing is slicing it up and sewing it back together. This is a confident beginner quilt pattern since we will be working with a lot of bias here. So let's get started. First up, take a few of the 10-inch squares and lay them on top of each other. First, you're going to cut it in half, leaving you with two 5-inch by 10-inch rectangles. Next, you can spin your mat around and cut it in half again, leaving you with four 5-inch squares. Spin your mat around again and you are going to cut on the diagonal both ways, which will now leave you with 8 half square triangles. Now I am going to spread these apart real quick to give you a better look and to get ready for the next step. So then you're going to take your ruler and use the 45-degree line, and on every other half square triangles, cut it in half again to form two smaller triangles. Now I went ahead and just spin the mat to help cut every other half square triangles. And all you're going to be doing is repeating all these steps to every single layer cake 10-inch square that you have, but keep all like sectional cuts in a stack off to the side. Once everything is cut, you're going to take the center smaller triangles and rotate the fabrics around while keeping all of the center triangles the same print. Then that's it. You are now ready to sew it all back together again. So first up, I am going to teach you the lazy method of sewing it all back together. It's also a little bit of a cheat. This way, it will make it quick just in case you do need a quilt very quickly. But stay tuned because if you're not up for this lazy method, I will show you how to correctly put this block back together again. With that said, we are going to start at the bottom right section, and you're going to take these two smaller triangles and place them right sides together like so, and then sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then afterwards go ahead and press your seams to the dark side. Next, take your pieced triangles and lay it on top of the larger triangle, but move it more towards the center point. You will have about a 1/4 inch, give or take, of extra fabric hanging down towards the bottom because technically this larger triangle is a little bit too big. But go ahead and sew them together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, then afterwards press your seam towards the larger triangle. Now this mini block we just created is not a perfect square, and that's okay right now. Trust me, we need to make one more mini block so I can show you this quick lazy method trick. So next we are going to start on the bottom left section and once again take these two smaller triangles, place them right sides together like so, and sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Afterwards, press your seams to the dark side. Then go ahead and take your piece triangle and lay it on top of the larger triangle, but move it towards the center point. And now you will have a 1/4 inch, give or take, of extra fabric hanging off to the left side. So then go ahead and sew them together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and press your seams towards the larger triangle. Now, if you look closely with these two mini blocks that we just formed, the right side is a little bit longer than the left side. So go ahead and lay these two right sides together. And as long as you have been pressing your seams to the larger triangle, everything will nestle together. But as you will see, towards the bottom, you will have excess fabric, and the top mini block will have excess fabric hanging off towards the right now. But go ahead and sew these together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now that the blocks are sewn together, you can see it more clearly, the overhang. But still stay with me because next we will need to repeat the same exact steps to the top section now. So with the top section, you are now going to take these two smaller triangles and place them right sides together, sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then afterwards go ahead and press your seams to the dark side. Next, take your piece triangle and lay it on top of the larger triangle, but move it once again towards the center point, and you will have a 1/4 inch, give or take, of fabric hanging upwards towards the top. But go ahead and sew these together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and press your seams towards the larger triangle. Once again, this is not a perfect square, but we are almost close to the finish line where this will come together so fast. So lastly, all you're going to do is take that top right section, once again, sew the two smaller triangles together, place them right sides together, and sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then go ahead and press your seams to the dark side. Then go ahead and take your piece triangle and lay it on top of the larger triangle, but once again, moving it towards the center point, and you will have a 1/4 inch, give or take, of extra fabric hanging off to the right side. But go ahead and still sew them together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then afterwards, press your seams towards the larger triangle. Now, if you look closely with those two mini blocks we just formed, the left side is a little longer than the right side on the top. Go ahead and sew these two right sides together, and as long as your seams are pressed to the larger triangle, everything will nestle together. But as you will see towards the top, you will have excess fabric, and the top mini block will have excess fabric hanging off towards the left now, but still sew them together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now that the blocks are sewn together, you can see it more clearly, all the extra overhang. But throughout this whole entire time, we have been focusing on sewing everything towards the center point, because now you are going to take that top section and place it right sides together to the bottom section. Since this is not a normal quilt block layout, only make sure that that center pinwheel points line up and nestle together. Doing so will make the block look uneven and not normal, but because on the left you should see about a 1/4 inch hanging off, as well as the top fabric hanging over about a 1/4 inch on the right. Since this block is uneven and not normal, you can also pin it together to make sure everything is held in place while you go ahead and sew your 1/4 inch seam allowance. But once again, all you need to make sure is that center pinwheel points line up and match. That's the only thing that matters right now. Now that we have this horrible block like we've once all had when we first started out quilting, which I am taking y'all down memory lane, Bring out your cutting mat, and now we are going to square it up to an 8-inch square. If you have an 8-inch square ruler, that is perfect, but you can also take a 8.5-inch square ruler and place the center point seam from your block on the 4-inch line on the square ruler. Then you're just going to trim the excess fabric off. And if you have one of these spinning mats, it makes this section go very easy and very quickly. If you don't happen to have a square ruler, then that is okay. Take whatever ruler you have on hand and line up the vertical seam on your quilt block on the 4-inch line on your ruler. Then trim off the excess fabric again. Then go ahead and trim off all 4 sides, and your block will measure an 8-inch square when you are done. Now, this is the quick and lazy method because all you will need to do is trim your block once. I will 100% admit that block trimming for myself is not fun, so I do like to try and find nice little neat tricks. So I do hope you all are enjoying this one. But if it is too complicated or messes up with your quilter brain, then here's how you do it the right way. Here is a wonky cheater block, and here is the block that we just made. So what you will need to do is just like the cheater block version, you're going to sew your smaller triangles together, press the seams to the dark side, then sew your piece triangle to the larger triangle, and you're done. You have now created the mini blocks. Now I've already done so, just so we can save us some time, but here is where things start to change. Once you have sewn all of your mini blocks together, within your final block, you are going to need to trim your blocks down to 4.25 inch. So I'm going to move these over off to the side and take the bottom right block first. Now this block, I'm going to rotate it because from that center point where the pinwheel will meet, I'm going to measure 4.25 inch away and then trim off the excess fabric. And if you are paying attention to the cheater block method, in which I have an example here to my left, this bottom hangover is actually what I am trimming off this mini block right now. Now you can go a step further and trim off the top to get rid of the dog ear if you're not a fan of dog ears on a quilt block, but either way you are done with mini block number 1. Now we are going to repeat and trim the bottom left, which I will rotate it to measure 4.25 inch away from the center point and trim the excess fabric away. Which this is the excess fabric shown here on the far left of the cheater block. Now with all this said, I will repeat these steps to the top mini blocks. Then once all of your mini blocks are trimmed, you're going to sew your blocks together to form a row, and lastly, sew your rows together to complete your quilt block. And as you can see here, you will end up with the same exact block. Now, why is the cheater block quicker? Well, as you can see, you can just finish the block like so on this green version, and then take your ruler and trim off the areas all around in one go instead of 4 per each block. So if you're someone like myself who hates trimming blocks, then this is a nice cheater method to get the quilt done faster. But either way, I wanted to show you both methods since I know some quilters like to go by the books, so to speak. So go ahead and pick a version and sew and trim your blocks. Then once all of your blocks are finished, it is time to lay your quilt out. So for this quilt, I used 1 layer cake. You of course can use more than one to make a larger quilt if you wish. The block measurements are 8 inches unfinished and 7.5 inches finished. So each block is technically 1 layer cake, a 10-inch square. Since I used 1 layer cake package, which had 40 squares in it, I am going to lay my quilt out 5 by 8, which will give me a quilt about 37.5 by 60 inches, which is a baby slash crib size quilt, or aka a nice doggy quilt for my fur babies. So yes, I do like to make my doggies quilts since they do deserve nice quilts made from mom. But anyways, just go ahead and sew your blocks together to form rows. And lastly, sew your rows together to complete your quilt top and you're done. I do hope you have enjoyed this layer cake quilt pattern. I also hope you found the cheater lazy method at least interesting. And if you end up making this quilt, please feel free to share it on Instagram and tag me in it. I'd love to see what fabrics you have selected. And if you could, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell because next video, you'll see me long arm quilt this beauty out. But until then, I will see you next time.